So I'll have that sitting up and then I can play it. You are live.
Preview broadcast. Hold on. Okay. Current research practices. I know, it's almost like you don't know what to say.
And we think about, you remember the Tuskegee Institute, the research there that they did on African Americans. Before we get to that, we'll get to that part of it. Why did it take 60 years to come to light?
You know what? Apparently nobody knew about this. This researcher at Wellesley College was looking into the experiments done in Tuskegee and found that this one doctor named John Cutler, that before he did Tuskegee, he went to Guatemala. So she found these documents and she brought them to light. As a matter of fact, we called the Guatemalan embassy this morning to get a response, and they didn't really even have anything to say. They said this was new to them. They had just heard about it.
And we mentioned the Tuskegee experiment. Is there any relationship?
Yeah, there is a relationship because it was the same doctor, but there is a difference, which I think is important to point out. In Tuskegee, what they did, and this was in the 30s through the set.
Oh, what happened?
They had just caught it on their own. But the government had a medicine for this.
I wonder if it's every time we're doing something here.
Oh, man.
Oh, come on.
Technical difficulties.
Well, I don't want to compare one to the other. Both are horrible, but they are different.
I really, it's unfathomable, as you said. And I saw you reading it, just getting choked up there.
Yes, it's so disturbing. And, thank goodness today there are different standards there. At that time, it was like the Wild West. You could pretty much do whatever you wanted. Now there are standards for it so that those kinds of things we hope don't happen.
Secretary of State, Health and Human Services Secretary, both apologizing as well. The government should apologize. It's horrific. This doesn't live up to our standards.
No. And thank God, hopefully this does not happen now. There are standards.
Jeez, why is it doing that?
Well, I'm going to close that out because I don't need it anymore. Hey, guys.
Hey there.
You got 2 on my Periscope.
We're using a new
Streaming software, so we're
kind of having some technical difficulties, but
so we're back to the Ides again. So we just showed Don Lemon and a correspondent talking about syphilis experiments on people in Guatemala, 46 to 48, 1946.
That Obama apologized for. Are you going to show him the Bill Clinton?
Yeah, I was going to show that one too.
And now we're going to show you the Bill Clinton apology for
Tuskegee in 1997, I believe. So give me a moment.
Wait.
Oh, I need to first. Chrome tab. Come on.
That's good.
That's coming. There we go.
What the United States government did was shameful, and I am sorry.
We have no idea how many wives, girlfriends, children
30.
inherited the disease and also died or were forever crippled by its effects.
For 40 years, the U.S. government operated public health service conducted what was known as the Tuskegee Syphilis Study, one of the darkest chapters in American history. Now, over 40 years after the study ended, we still don't know and might never know the full extent of its effects. And the study might have continued if not for a 1972 article from Associated Press reporter Jean Heller.
Everyone who knew about this, to my way of thinking, everyone who knew about this and didn't blow the whistle, that didn't shout to high heaven, this is wrong, is culpable.
Syphilis was considered a national health crisis in the early 20th century.
You don't know a thing about syphilis, except that you've got it.
And many doctors at the time thought syphilis and other medical complications were affected by race, To study the disease, researchers found a population of poor, Black, syphilitic sharecroppers in and around Tuskegee, Alabama during the Great Depression. Nearly 400 of the participants had syphilis, while another 200, the control group, did not. In the end, as many as 100 men died from complications related to untreated syphilis, and the message was very clear. Black deaths mattered.
Medical doctors.
What's it doing?
That's me. I think it's me doing it.
To die for what they could discover from their bodies later.
How old were you when you first learned about the Tuskegee study?
23.
The day you published this story, the day the story was published, did you know what was getting ready to happen?
Yeah. I knew it would be explosive. After the story broke, and there was this incredible public outcry, Senator Kennedy had held very, very public congressional hearings on this.
If they had been white, your public health service would never have agreed to do this study in the first place. They wouldn't have dared.
The study and the aftermath are well documented in films and books, but there are still things we might never know. And for Heller, that goes back to the very beginning.
I still have not heard the answer to the very simple question of why. They should have been able to determine after the first 3 or 4 autopsies that the inside of a Black person ravaged by syphilis looks identical to the insides of a white person and stop the study.
Beyond that, Heller believes there's no way to know just how many people were directly or adjacently affected by the study or its disclosure. Survivors, victims of the study, and their families did win a $10 million settlement from the U.S. government, and the study's disclosure led to modern medical ethics procedures. But Heller says more than 40 years later, there's still at least one lesson to be learned from the Tuskegee syphilis study.
Those of us who recognize that this country has got so far to go, never quit fighting. Never quit standing up and yelling. I don't care if you're LGBT. I don't care if you're Black. I don't care if you're disabled. You need advocates. You need people who can move the world.
So I don't need that anymore.
Yeah, so just close that. All right. All right, now we're going to get started.
So we're at Ides again.
And Ides are, as you know, a time of celebration, and Lou and I are here to make the Ides great again. And I think we're doing that by shedding light on things and debunking, events in history that, you think the news is fake, the history is even faker. And so we began with showing you the apology from the Obama administration over Guatemalan syphilis experiments, which we'd never heard of until shortly before we went live.
Mm-hmm.
And then Bill Clinton apologizing for the Tuskegee experiment. And the Tuskegee experiment went on from, four decades, 32 to 72. And do you think your government has become more moral, better?
And we're going to dig into some stuff with Tuskegee and the Public Health Service, which is what ran this thing.
Right.
And you're going to find out about Dr. Langmuir later on, because that's in the title, What is a Langmuir? And we want to know too, because this is seems to me like an evil guy.
Well,
and
the Tuskegee and these experiments were going on
even before he got there.
Yeah.
So we're gonna overlap some dates of things too. There's a range of years that overlap with biological and chemical stuff, and the way we've been told things, and especially about Tuskegee, it seems like they've washed the story about Tuskegee a little bit, saying that the United States did not inject these victims with syphilis. They already had it.
We have different thoughts on that, just from the Guatemalan experiments.
No, that's just, I'm saying the story's been washed.
Right. And then you're going to learn about a Terre Haute prison experiment And then with the Public Health Service, we stumbled onto the FSA, which is the Federal Service Agency.
Federal Security Agency.
Federal Security Agency.
Which is an independent agency along the lines of the Federal Reserve and the CDC.
And researching that, we stumbled upon things like the early warning system for against biological warfare that came about during the Korean War, which that's how the whole Alexander Langmuir, who is...
We're going to tie it into today and the language and how the world's governments and the WHO and the UN, they all have the same message. And it's going to, this is all going to kind of tie it together.
It's going to tie into the Epidemic Intelligence Service, which Langmuir, I can't pronounce his name. He's the one that created the Epidemic Intelligence Service. And the Epidemic Intelligence Service was present in China. They have agents all
for
over
every outbreak. And this
world.
Is the thing is with all the press conferences and the updates on this so-called COVID crap, and you never hear about the Epidemic Intelligence Service. Now,
Right.
I heard of this thing from a stream that Owen Benjamin did a couple of months ago. And you look this thing up, it's been around since 51, and nobody's ever heard of it. We're going to go into more about the EIS too and Mr. Langmuir. So
Right. And we want to do this because we want you to keep this in mind as we go forward now with all the coronavirus stuff and all of the new normal rules and regulations and the coming vaccine that they're trying to condition you for it to be mandatory, that Public Health Service, CDC, when have they ever had your best interest at heart? I mean,
and going back to Vaughn's original question when we first started talking to you guys tonight is, do you think after Tuskegee, and then when we start going into more in depth on some of these things with Guatemala and Terre Haute, do you think that these entities of the federal government got better, got found God, got moral, got more integrity, or did they devolve a bit?
Right. And you need to keep that in mind when the CDC, you hear Birx and Fauci and all these guys. I don't see Fauci and Birx any differently than the people that ran these experiments. So we want you to keep it in mind because we need to understand where our federal government is coming from when they have these agencies that are basically ruling our lives. I mean, they've got parts of the country shut down. Schools are going. They're transforming this country.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to know. You need to know what they're all about because it's not about public health.
It's not you'd think the government
any more than Tuskegee was.
Let people basically die from Tuskegee. Do you think that they have they're concerned about your health? That's what they're concerned about.
Yeah.
So we're going to dive in.
We'll start with Tuskegee.
And
most
remember,
people know about
I meant to say earlier, guys, get a pen and paper and write some things down and some key names and stuff, because there are some other people have done stuff along. The only time that we've ever seen an article about the Epidemic Intelligence Service, Yvonne found today when we were getting ready for doing prep today.
Can I go to that on here without messing up my system?
I don't know. But, we'll plug the guy's name because if you get a pen and paper or whatever you take notes on, Lloyd Billingsley.
Yeah.
And he's done a couple of articles this year.
The Independent Institute, which I've never heard of, but on Twitter, you can go to the Independent Institute and it tweets out like all their articles.
Uh-huh.
Articles look really good and interesting.
But he's the only person I've ever seen, before Owen Benjamin, never heard of the EIS.
Right.
And now when you look into this thing, it's like, whoa, this thing's been around for decades and it's up to a lot of no good. But we're going to get into that later as well. And pay attention also to the dates and how the years, how they overlap with what's going on.
Because that matters. You have to remember that, Langmuir, and I was now Langmuir created the Epidemic Intelligence Service in 1951. Okay, that was how many years after the end of World War II?
6 years after, but we're actually gonna get into him a little bit. But think about these dates with Tuskegee,
while America's, acting like we're the, the shining light on the hill and this great force in the world, there was a lot of dark things going on in our name. And Tuskegee, everybody knows about Tuskegee, and but you don't know the details. Like, I didn't realize that it went on for 4 decades. I don't know. Maybe you guys did, 1932 to 1972.
And we don't get a whistleblower from this until 72. So keep that in mind.
Right.
So 1972, we finally get a whistleblower, and then it gets shut down. So 72 goes through Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Nixon.
Yeah, Republican. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. This is that's key. But keep an eye on these dates. And then we've got the Public Health Service, which is what started this experiment on these men in Tuskegee. And the Public Health Service gets put under the...
Is that the FSA?
Yeah, the Federal Security Agency,
which we'd never heard of.
And another thing we found out about the Federal Security Agency is that from 42 to 44, it was a cover for the
biological warfare.
About biological warfare during World War II for biological and chemical weapons. So they, for whatever reason,
and it
44,
was secret. It was secret.
Yeah, but it wasn't even doing what the thing. A lot of things are named lofty names, and then it's not really what it was. Kind of like the Patriot Act and things like that.
So Tuskegee, when you start reading about it, you get into the details. The one article that you had where they're talking about.
You know what? Let's show some guys.
They say that it was 600 African Americans. I think it was probably more.
Probably.
When they talk about it, they say they went to Tuskegee because for whatever reason, in this particular area, there was a higher amount of syphilis within the Black community. And I'm reading a Time magazine article.
Yeah, and this is where you get the whitewash kind of going on, because Time is, Yvonne's reading this article from Time, and is talking about how they went into this experiment, concerned about African Americans' health and how to make it better. And that is not at all what it was. And I found a great article from, they're called FYEAH History.
It's good. It's a good site.
FYEAH history.com. And this article was written just last week. And there's a thing in there called neurosyphilis, which is like a graduated form after if you've had syphilis for a while,
it goes to your brain.
It gets into your brain. And what they did, and this article seems to be well researched. There's some links at the bottom as well. And I encourage all you guys to go to the FYEAHhistory.com and how it got started. And it was, people want to talk about racism.
Yeah, they didn't believe that Black men were less likely to get the neurosyphilis because their brains weren't as developed.
Well, because a Black person's brain was less developed thanks to their childlike euphoria of a carefree life. And this is in 1932 when they started thinking, of this stuff. And
like in kind of the eugenics movement.
And this is a federal agency under the Roosevelt administration.
Right.
And we have, we're years away from him and turning 100,000 Japanese and stuff. Yeah. Even, citizens, American-born citizens.
Right.
So, and this is not a Republican Democrat thing. This is the government, the system.
Yeah.
Period. But we get further down into this article.
Which used data from to claim it was biological difference.
The brains were, again, that's where they were thinking. So this was not to improve African Americans'
Yeah, like the
health.
Time magazine, when they're rewriting history, they're saying that, they were doing it because they were concerned about the syphilis problem within the Black community and they wanted to help. No, we don't think they wanted to help.
And here's where, so supposedly they went to Tuskegee because there was an alarming rate of syphilis people in the area, in the region. And that was going to be the perfect area to do it. Now, me and Yvonne, we have no proof of this, but it seems to me that we're going to get into some horror about these other experiments. There's a doctor involved in Tuskegee and Terre Haute and Guatemala. and they purposefully injected people with what they were trying to get them sick with syphilis, and it's kind of sick about.
Well, hold on, I want to read
how
this.
some of the ways they did it.
When I read this sentence, think about this in relation to Corona and Wuhan University. Not only did the school have a history of studying syphilis, but Macon County, Georgia, where the school was based, was seeing a rise of syphilis. So here you have a rise in cases in it where they're studying this, and Wuhan broke out where there's, you got Wuhan University and you got the bioweapons.
And it was a public health service officer who said this is an unusual opportunity. I wonder if it was a created opportunity.
Right.
So the plan was to study 400 men with syphilis, along with a control group of 200 who didn't have syphilis, and just see what happened. So they just sat back for 40 years. Right. And now when they started this in 32, there was not what they considered a good treatment for syphilis.
Right.
But during this experiment, getting into the 40s, they found out that penicillin was a good treatment and you could get rid of it.
Right.
But they sat on it. Their whole deal was to let these men stay sick with this.
Right. They didn't treat them.
And it transferred. They went to their partners.
There were babies that were
dozens
born.
of kids were born with it. And then you get to a certain point, and I can't remember. This is a long article, but the doctors basically. Here's one of the doctors here.
Right. Came up with
and they had to keep, getting their trust and stuff. And most of the, the people that the men saw would be a black doctor and nurse and stuff. But you get to a certain point, one of the doctors actually says, and it's in the article, I encourage you to go to fyihistory.com and look this up from August 6th. He said that we didn't care about them right now. They're only worth anything to us when they're dead, because they wanted to do autopsies and see. And you saw that in the clip on the CNN clip. So
right,
there's that article right there.
But the article also goes on to say that some of the men, weren't getting better, so they sought.
Yeah, that's a good one.
They sought out. They sought out help somewhere else, and those places had been called in advance and had a list of people that were in this study, and those doctors were told not to give them the penicillin.
Yeah.
And these other doctors complied.
And so even with this whitewash of the history that we think has happened, with what you can find on the internet, especially Wikipedia, is that they didn't inject them with syphilis. They just found ones with syphilis, and then they withheld treatment. What they did is they gave them placebos. They told these men that they were being treated, they were getting free health care, basically.
Right.
And then, treated for different issues, they were given placebos. So you're right. You're right, Ling 305. I don't know what your real name is, but Ling 305, it's evil. Hey, Bear X-ray.
And keep this in mind too. During the Corona thing, they're talking about how the Black community and people of color are more vulnerable and prone to getting Corona. And at the same time, when they're talking about who's going to get the vaccine first, they're saying, well, we need to get it to those people that need it, that are being hit the hardest. So they're already setting up a scenario where they're going to, under the guise of protecting them and helping them, they're going to use the Black people and other people of color as, to me, the guinea pigs for this very new kind of.
So Yvonne's going to tell you about this doctor. This doctor is tied in with Tuskegee, Terre Haute, and Guatemala, which we found out about Terre Haute and Guatemala about 2 hours ago.
Yeah.
Maybe. Same doctor. And so you tell me they didn't infect guys with syphilis in the U.S., this same doctor. He only did it but he did it Terre Haute.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when he's writing about his findings in Guatemala, he's saying that there's no way that we could do this domestically. Now, Guatemala, when they did it in Guatemala, when Don Lemon, at the beginning of this scope, when Don Lemon and that lady,
I think it was in that clip, but they
are talking about Obama apologizing.
They reached out to Guatemala for comment, and they didn't know about it.
They didn't know about it, and from everything we can tell, they were kept in the dark. But when they talked about it, they made it seem like they hired prostitutes to infect the men. But when we did research, we found that they were doing it on not just prostitutes, but orphans, school kids.
The ages, I think, were from 10 to 72.
Right. And Guatemala was from 46 to 48. But then
keep those dates in mind.
It didn't
46 to 48.
Extend to 53.
But there were people still there doing serology studies till 53, so it didn't get completely shut down. Supposedly they weren't doing the whole trying to infect thing.
Right. So, so he said, you know, judging from those results and stuff, there's no way we could do that domestically in America. But the Tuskegee experiment started in 1932, which is what, 14 years before they first started in Guatemala.
Yeah.
And so when they say that they went to Tuskegee because there was a higher incidence of syphilis in the Black community, I have to wonder, is that because they were studying that virus in that area and somehow, I don't know, through water, I don't know how they could have done it. I believe they gave them. I can't find anything
I wouldn't put it past them. We can't,
where they injected them, but
they did the other two places.
And then Terre Haute in the prison thing, they claimed that they got the consent from the prisoners.
Yeah, but they got, you know what, and I'm glad you said that, because they got consent of the Tuskegee guys too. But they lied to them from the very beginning.
And they claimed the way they slept at night, I think, is because they told themselves, well, they weren't being treated for syphilis even though they had it. And so we weren't doing anything differently by not treating them. And that's a lie, because what you lied and you told them that you were going to treat them. But the Terre Haute thing with the prisoners, they claim that they got the consent forms, and I don't believe that. I think that's total all-out lies. But that, so
you know, real quick, you know, think about the dates, and you've got Tuskegee from 32 to 72, and a lot of it happens in the 40s,
right.
The late 40s after the war, and some of it during the war with the Federal Security Agency being, you know, a secret you know, biological warfare thing from 42 to 44. 44 is when they reorganized everything and put, you know, redid the organizational charts for all these agencies, and also the Public Health Service. This is the ones that started the Tuskegee experiment. Federal Health Service is the organization that Jerome Adams, our Surgeon General,
he's the operational head.
He's the operational head of the FHS, so it's still around.
Right.
And this is what the CDC and the NIH and all, they report to the Federal Health Service, and they're all in Atlanta. Yeah. And then we got it. You know, Pete, I know some of you guys have seen about Event 201, and you hear about Johns Hopkins. Well, Johns Hopkins is around Atlanta too, not in Atlanta. I can't remember where. Yeah. Everything seems to, with regard to COVID, also flows back into Johns Hopkins.
Yeah.
And that's where the CDC is based as well. So you've got just so much tied to Johns Hopkins, and there's an open letter of a bunch of former EIS people. We're going to get into
Epidemic
EIS.
Intelligence Service agents.
We're going to get into that, but they signed a letter to to Trump, to the government, whoever.
After Trump changed the
county reporting
results to go not
to
from the
HHS.
Hospitals to the HHS instead of CDC, and then miraculously we saw
a
plummet. They're mad that it was taken away from CDC. They think CDC should just be in the chart.
They can't massage the numbers as much. But remember, a lot of people have seen Event 201. You guys can search this on YouTube and see it and watch the whole thing. And this was a Bill Gates thing as well. And they laid out exactly what they would do, and they would flood the zone with information about making people believe what was happening.
Right. And they would get social media influencers. They would get everybody from every kind of cultural.
And actually look up Amazing Polly.
Yeah,
Amazing Polly on YouTube. She's got some great stuff on this, and it all seems to flow back to Johns Hopkins. But that's why this thing is titled Alexander Langmuir, or what is a Langmuir?
Right.
And we still want to. I mean, we've looked into it a bunch, and we kind of touched on him.
He's a rabbit hole, and the Epidemic Intelligence Service itself is a rabbit hole. that leads you on to other things
And
like the federal service.
And the
then
people that come out of the epidemic intelligence service, they're called officers.
Yeah,
and it's been around since 51. There's about 3,500 of these people.
And it's not many,
No.
considering the fact that the EIS gets about $7 billion a year. And they have had to date 3,500 officers. That's not very many since 1951 when you're talking about that much money. Like, I don't know how long they've been getting $7 billion. I would, probably 20 years.
I don't need that guy. This is the one. So we're going to talk about Alexander Langmuir.
Yeah.
He came to the CDC, I believe, in 49-50. And I'm going to show you, this is from the NIH website. They like to brag about this guy, which to me, it's not, they think it's bragging. I'm just glad for the truth that
we can see for ourselves. Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes?
Alexander Duncan Langmuir. Let's see if this pops up. Hopefully you guys can see this now. So Alexander Langmuir, he went to Harvard, Cornell, college student, inspired by Massachusetts Commissioner of Health George Hoyt Bigelow to enter the field of public health. So he first worked at the New York State Health Department. He became a medical consultant, then an assistant district health officer in Albany, which is the capital of New York. So he goes from Johns Hopkins in the 40s. He's an academic. He's a deputy commissioner with a county in New York. He's dismayed that he chose a career in public health rather than clinical medicine. His family was, by the way. So he expressed in his later years that his time in local public health taught him lessons that were fundamental to his achievements. And I want to get into his achievements down the road. So from 42 to 46, he was actually an epidemiologist with the armed forces, 42 to 46. And his thing was acute respiratory diseases, kind of like what we're in now.
Yeah.
Stimulating his lifelong interest in influenza. So in 46, he returns to Johns Hopkins as an associate professor. And in 49, he's restive in academia and was attracted to the challenge of becoming the first chief epidemiologist at the newly established CDC. It was Communicable Disease Center. Now it's the Centers for Disease Control. They kept the acronym.
Right.
In Atlanta, Georgia, which is where Johns Hopkins is too. So he held this position for 20 years. So he went back to Harvard, and then he went back to Johns Hopkins after his 20 years at the CDC. So in 51, here's a good one. And start thinking about the dates we were talking about with all these other, with the health service and the experiments and everything. So in 51, Dr. Langmuir, following the start of the Korean War, establishes the Epidemic Intelligence Service as an early warning system against biologic warfare. Now think about that. He wants to have an early warning system against biologic warfare. So he gets there. There's already been biological warfare going on against these Tuskegee gentlemen.
Yeah, the America.
For 19 years.
That our own agencies
the CDC,
have been doing.
The CDC, and then following the EIS, they all come out of the Federal Health Service. And this is another thing, how I love how the government names things. Service. Now, that's not much of a service to let you stay sick.
Right.
So here's a good one. So EIS officers then and now are physicians, veterinarians, nurses, and health scientists who serve 2-year assignments. So they kind of go into, it's not like a military, but they sign up for 2 years.
Right.
He taught what he called shoe leather epidemiology. They stressed that they love to 10% is class and 90% is out in the field. And so they love to say that they're getting data and they're investigating the problem. So each epidemic aid call was an adventure and a training experience, even the false alarms.
Right.
He stressed that epidemiology should be taught in the field, not in the classroom. So I've already covered that. So
go to the part that describes them. So you can...
Oh, that's coming up. But we need to talk about, we've talked about the 1976.
Or maybe show us side by side.
Yeah. But 1976, we talked about the epidemic that never happened. And that was the CDC saying, we've got to make a vaccine because we're going to, it's going to be the Spanish flu all over again. And they talked President Ford into supposedly getting vaccinated himself and
on live TV.
You know, and so look at our podcast from last month on that. But so Langmuir in 55, they got their early recognition due to the Cutter incident. And so think about 55 and 76. So the Cutter incident was the new inactivated polio vaccine was causing cases of polio. And so the Surgeon General asked Langmuir to develop a surveillance system to determine the extent of the problem. He deployed a staff, and within days, they determined the cases were caused by vaccine from a single manufacturer, Cutter Laboratories. And so we haven't gone down that rabbit hole.
Right.
And we know it is. So he was able to predict with great accuracy the expected size of the epidemic and the number of secondary cases that would occur. This response enhanced the reputation of the young agency and established epidemic aid as one of its singular characteristics. So in 55, this agency has come onto the stage, and we have never heard of them before.
And they're able to predict, you know, what the polio vaccine, like the numbers and stuff. Maybe they were able to predict it because the paralyzed, you know, that problem came from the vaccines.
Yeah.
You know, which came first?
Which is like we're worried about with the vaccine in development now.
Right.
So today, the EIS program has evolved into a surveillance and response unit for all types of health problems. More than 3,500 of these people have abstained. And now listen to this. The EIS, many of the nation's medical and public health leaders, including CDC directors, state health department directors, state epidemiologists, and deans of the country's premier schools of public health are EIS alumni.
Right.
And since 1980, CDC has supported the development and implementation of 48 two-year field epidemiology training programs that cover 60 countries and are modeled after the EIS in their teaching and practice of applied field epidemiology.
Can you have this on the screen at the same time that this is on? Or
yeah, let's see. And they won't be, let's see.
On StreamYard?
I can go to this.
Yeah. Well, can you read? You can't read it though.
Well, I think I might still be able to read it.
Okay.
Wait, it's right here. I can still read it.
Okay,
so you
cool.
can see it. So I'll keep this up and we can kind of go back and forth. So what we're talking about is the common narrative worldwide and in this nation, in every state, about how we're dealing with all this, what I call BS. But
right.
These guys have spread out over the decades from the EIS.
They go into the CDC, they go to the WHO, they go into different departments in health agencies, just in
states
Europe,
and cities,
in
counties,
Africa, like all over the world. So like when we watched all of this happen from coronavirus, from the shutdowns to the reopening to the new normal regulations, mask and social distancing, the whole world is doing the exact same thing. Yeah. And that's because these critical positions in these health departments or, you know, health related departments all over the world, and they're trained from.
Remember, I said that
EIS agents.
There's 3,500 actual EIS alumni throughout the U.S. and in the world, but also with their program that they put in over 60 countries, there's more than 3,000 people that have graduated from those worldwide. So many of these graduates now hold leadership positions within their country's ministries of health, the WHO, and other global health organizations.
Right.
So it's the same messaging. And just a quick side note, when people worried about black helicopters and a world police force and a world this or that, hey guys, it might be the U.S.
Well, you know, what other country has troops stationed all over
just
the world?
About in over half the nations. But what other nation has sent out?
China doesn't.
This is the big one. Is
Russia doesn't.
How many nations have as many of their graduates as the U.S. does? Nobody does. Nobody touches us.
Right.
That. So here you get into, they don't call it contact tracing back then, but the idea of effective national disease surveillance captured Alex Langmuir's imagination throughout his career. He believed that surveillance is the foundation for evidence-based public health action. Langmuir preached the importance of the systematic collection of pertinent data, the consolidation and analysis of these data into useful information, and the dissemination of the results to all who need to know so they can take action. His goal is to use surveillance systems to define populations at risk for disease, determine interventions, and monitor their impact. And now I remind you of the dates and the years overlaps of these terrible experiments on humans in Guatemala, in the prison, and at Tuskegee. While he is developing all these programs, Langmuir has to be aware of all of these programs, of these biological. He started EIS because he wanted to have early warnings on biological warfare.
Well, that's what
why
the claim.
Why would you need that if you were already doing biological warfare on your own people?
Right.
So the dates of he came in between the start and the finish of the Tuskegee experiment. He was there the whole time. It started before him. It went on after him. And he's a high up. He was the founder of that. He was the head epidemiologist for 20 years at the CDC. So just think about those dates and how they overlap. This guy cares about us, and he's putting a surveillance system in place because he just wants to keep us all safe.
Right.
So Langmuir and his staff developed novel national surveillance programs for an array of communicable diseases and for chronic diseases, injuries, and reproductive health.
Yeah, why is the epidemiology involved in reproductive health?
Which I'll show you some videos here shortly that reproductive health always means abortion.
It does.
Indeed, he considered, listen to this, this is a key sentence. Indeed, and this is from the NIH website, remember. The NIH is bragging about this guy. This is a laudatory article about Langmuir.
Yeah, I don't want you to take this in because we're gonna show you a few clips of this guy speaking. So we want to describe how the NIH and see how they describe him, and then I want you to watch. Indeed,
he considered the population explosion to be the most serious epidemic of all.
Yeah,
that is people being born. Humans being born is the most serious epidemic of all.
The guy that created the Epidemic Intelligence Service thought population explosion was the biggest epidemic at all. It's kind of like Bill Gates when he talks about population and reducing population through vaccines.
And he's laughing. Some of those numbers are going to have to come down.
Right.
One of them being population.
Right.
So here is Altman. I'm not sure who Altman is because I didn't see that in the beginning. Here's the description of Langmuir. So when I saw this description, I had to look him up on YouTube and stuff. So I found a neat little video. So I want you to see. There's a juxtaposition here. So Altman described Langmuir as a tall man who could command immediate attention when he stood to speak to audiences in his deep voice. So we're going to come back to this article here, and I want to go to a little YouTube video of Mr. Langmuir.
Just a few clips. Give you an idea.
So this might take a few minutes, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes. So let's look at
Langmuir.
And I want to, there it is.
Is that the first one you want? It's 41 minutes?
No, I want to be at 150. And I've already blown my cover so you can see this tall man with a deep, resonant voice.
Oh, look at that.
So we're about to start him up, but I want you to see the whole. I want to put it on this.
All right.
$149.
Your early life, the evolution of your interests and your directions.
Command the room.
We then move on to deal with the major events and developments which centered around your almost 20 years here at CDC. And finally, to return to two notable contributions with which the name Alex Langmuir is inextricably linked, surveillance and the Epidemic Intelligence Service.
Oh, look at the big smile.
To begin, let me What were Alex Langmuir's early roots?
Okay. Now you've seen the guy. You heard the description of this tall man that would command a room with his deep voice, and now watch him as he talks about his own life.
Born in Santa Monica, California, 1910, the third of 5 children, went through the local schools in Los Angeles. In 1921, my father was brought to the New York office of the New York Life Insurance Company, and I, of course, moved away from California. Was raised in Englewood, New Jersey, a suburb of New York City, until I entered Harvard College in 1927. I majored in physics at college.
Why physics, Alex?
Well, it was very simple. I was under enormous influence, very beneficial influence in most ways, of my uncle Irving Langmuir, a very distinguished physicist and chemist, Nobel Prize winner of the General Electric Company, and a man who was extraordinarily good to all of his nieces and nephews who would listen. And I was one who listened.
Were you a successful physicist?
Well, I was interested in chemistry. It came to me just so easily.
So you just heard him. He's talking about his own life, but he has to keep looking down at a table next to him where he's reading his own life story. So I'm going to go to another little clip. Row 2.
Well, actually, I was jumped a grade in junior high school. And so I entered college at the age of 17, and I think this hampered my outside activities considerably. But when I was sick with an infected ankle my sophomore year, I was elected president of the Harvard Liberal Club.
Oh.
At the time, this was a dying organization. I actually presided over its demise. But during this period, we had a very large number of meetings. An extraordinary range of people came. Among them, Margaret Sanger, who filled the room to the rafters, and my interest in family planning had its origin there.
Margaret Sanger.
Also, I had long been raised in an international tradition and a family interest, and I became the director my senior year of the New England Model League of Nations Assembly, where over 500 students came, and we reenacted a meeting.
You heard that right, Margaret Sanger.
Nations, and I suspect that's evidence of my international interests.
Why did you go into medicine after being so much immersed in physics? What?
Okay. Take it to another bit of this. I encourage you guys to look this up on YouTube. Alex Langmuir. They've actually got a yearly event now where there's the Langmuir speeches, and Jerome Adams has been there for that.
2018.
Let's see, 14.
Not perhaps the great character that Hampton Frost was. He was an awfully good teacher, and reviewing his lecture notes, realized what a sound and thorough person he was. And really part of the course was the lab, the epidemic problems that we were given, the basic records to put together and to analyze and to get rates in the right denominators and draw the inference. What is the modus spread? What is the basis of this? And this is the case study method that Frost developed, which I still think is the best method of teaching, and which I've used all the rest of my life and honed to the best of my ability.
This theme of epidemics and field work and shoe leather epidemiology pervades. You left Hopkins. Did you then continue this?
I went back in New York State as an indentured slave for a couple of years for the training.
Oh, he was an indentured slave.
Office.
Oh, yeah.
And learned about the terrible problem of being a regional officer, where the people in Albany in the state office would tell you what to do and what they wanted, and you had to go, local health officers, try to persuade them to do it, and the last thing in the world they wanted to do was that, and you were right in the middle between the two, and it is a job I wouldn't wish on a dog.
Oh, he wouldn't wish on a dog.
Before we were able to recruit, we used what we had. I went on one myself in September of '49.
Let us move on to some of the others. You've, I think, ran into some troubles with the gamma globulin trials.
Well, I think it's important to briefly mention that part of the epidemic aid, part of the justification was that biological warfare defense was a very hot issue. It was a major propaganda issue in the Korean War.
Yeah, talk about propaganda. Major biological warfare was a major issue at this time. And I want to go, Mr. And now keep in mind, he's being interviewed by a gentleman who's from the EIS himself.
Yeah.
They're all,
both of them are
EIS
good buddies. Agents.
And so I would have loved to have asked him, well, what about the biological warfare that's been happening for the last 22 years?
Right. Tuskegee.
What about that? And actually, I can't remember. I think this interview was in the 70s.
Right.
So he knew about all this.
Right.
The only man in the public health service except Gene Dyer of the NIH who was so informed. And I argue that if there was anything to this, there was need for epidemiologists. NIH was wise and knew that if there was anything here, there was going to be lots of money and they were going to get it. And so.
Oh, this is, you heard some infighting before, but this is infighting between
agency,
NIH,
bureaucracies,
NIH and NIS.
Right.
That fundamental epidemic aid controversy had a very deep significance.
Still reading.
And by winning that, we had the clear charge to recruit and train epidemiologists for civilian and military needs.
And that really was the Epidemic Intelligence Service.
Well, Dr. Mountain created this term because he was deeply concerned. He says, what we need is an epidemic intelligence service. And although I don't think it's terribly well chosen phraseology, we weren't going to argue, and it stayed that ever since.
Well, you lived with it for 19 years.
The next controversy, clearly, was when we assigned officer to Bill Hammond to work on gamma globulin in polio epidemics. He reported success in control of epidemics. Basil O'Connor and the National Foundation wanted to have a major epidemic control program, and I insisted that part of this program deal in every state health department from the beginning, and then let the NFIP come in and support. This was a head-on confrontation.
This was the confrontation with the NIH.
Leading to
program that still continues, the diarrheal disease program, and
I'd like to talk about that briefly. And we had a career development program that you and I cooked up one day after the EIS conference.
You and I.
Cooked up?
Driving home on a Friday night, following the Navy pattern, we said, let's get for these people after their 2 years of draft duty. And we planned that, and within a few hours, I was on the phone to Phil Brockman and offered him a career development assignment. And he then took his training and came back, and he took the bacterial disease activity. And after the staphylococcus problem, we had major hospital problems. And in '62, we had 18 hospitals infected with Salmonella derby. And Phil organized a big team for this, and this put us into the business of really finding out about diarrheal disease. Shigella surveillance followed, and then
more surveillance.
The whole diarrheal epidemic problem became a major concern. Gram-negative organisms became a recognized problem, and this, of course, is all mixed in with hospital.
So this is going to be
this is one of the most
the deep gravy. The thick.
Testing out isoniazid in tuberculosis meningitis. It worked both ways, as it always has.
What are we at?
Equal time for this medical meeting in the country because of the freedom and the freshness.
Okay.
Everything that's reported has happened in the last year by people who were there.
This has been a notable success, and with I think well over 500 EIS officers of various disciplines who participated in the time you were here, and many of these, including myself, are winding up in public health almost unexpectedly. I think we've only got a couple of minutes remaining, and I think we should say a word about surveillance, because this is a name which has been a concept which is certainly identified with you, and
with CDC. It's been picked up rapidly around the world. I've already covered a lot. It started with malaria surveillance and appraisal. It got its real national picture with the Qatar incident and polio surveillance. And then in 1957, with the tremendous concern over Asian flu and the worry that it might be a repetition in 1918, there was a plan to do a major national control program, make the vaccine, and so on. And we were low on the totem pole as far as flu went. The NIH had big flu programs, the Army, Navy, Air Force. It was all tied into the WHO. And our epidemiology program was WHO. And there was great confusion in Washington. And one day, 3rd of July, 1957, a word came from the Surgeon General, tell Alex Langmuir to run a surveillance of flu polio. And so suddenly we were on top. And we put out you and Fred Dunn put out a report twice a week that summarized all of the information accurately and carefully, included the formal recommendations, the committee reports. It was the document. It started with a circulation of about 500, the polio surveillance report circulation, and anyone could get on the list, and it grew to over 3,000. And essentially every hospital, every infectious disease. And this gave us an extensive broadening of our constituency, and every medical school would know, every medical student would know about what the surveillance report said about this nationally, deeply, emotionally fearful event, which turned out to be not nearly as bad as it was feared. But CDC was in the very center of this.
And then from surveillance and influenza, you went on to surveillance and a variety of other diseases.
Hepatitis, the diarrhea.
Here we go, guys. This is where we get into good surveillance of Mr. Langmuir.
Encephalitis, going way beyond infectious disease. There's an abortion surveillance program as part of our family planning is a very fundamental part. In fact,
Abortion surveillance program as a very fundamental part of human reproductive health.
Right. That doesn't make any sense.
They've been using the language for a long time.
Left has revolutionized the management of abortions through cooperative studies growing out of
the management of abortions through cooperative studies. Does that sound like an organization that is concerned about your health in 2020?
Does that sound like an organization that has any, like, epidemic intelligence service? What does that have to do with abortions?
Being in a position to have the facts, getting them accurately, interpreting them with care, making them public, correcting them when they're wrong, modifying them, being the source of the information for everyone. And this idea, in a free society at least, I think has been one of the great secrets. Nothing new about this, DA. William Farr did this in the 19th century in Britain in the Registrar General's office, and we just carried on that tradition.
Said there's nothing new under the sun. But
nothing new.
That's where I'm ending it. Nothing new under the sun. Yeah. That's the one thing in this thing that's true. Yeah. So what'd you think, guys?
That was the head. He was the guy that created the Epidemic Intelligence Service. The Epidemic Intelligence Service has agents all over this world. They had agents in China, in Wuhan, before. Yep. Oh, as a matter of fact, I can't pull up the article because it's on my iPad. But
Lloyd Billingsley.
I can't pronounce her name. It is Rod Rosenstein's sister-in-law.
Yeah, Rod Rosenstein's sister. It said sister.
Sister.
Because she has a different last name.
She works for the Epidemic Intelligence Service, and she was like the CDC spokesman. And she was speaking at some press conference in February, and the reporters were questioning her on the information they were getting from China about the Wuhan virus. And she kind of dodged, and she didn't really provide anything substantive. But it's kind of interesting that she's in the position that she is. They kind of downplayed the virus in the beginning. Like, she was saying that it could be just like the flu and might die out by spring. And, she was doing everything she could to minimize it. But knowing what you know about Rod Rosenstein and Spygate and all that happened to take our president out, the fact that she works for the Epidemic Intelligence Service and is involved in all this, and that the Epidemic Intelligence Service, which is their goal is to keep pandemics from
they're still on, so
they're supposed to contain them. So if we're paying them $7 billion, like what are they doing?
And so, knowing what you know about the timelines we've given you with these experiments on humans done by the U.S. government, of which Dr. Langmuir was a part of, this is, again, the NIH article about Langmuir. So they are lauding him. They're bragging. This is a positive article from NIH about him. Right. So he thrived on controversy and took pride in overcoming local political pressures to crusade for preventive medicine and other measures to safeguard public health. Now, does that jive with all that we know about the timelines? And this is just what we know from this afternoon after researching Tuskegee. We were doing that for a couple of weeks, but we found a lot of stuff on Tuskegee. But then today, all of a sudden, we stumble on Terre Haute, the prison, and we stumble on Guatemala, which I'd never heard of. I don't even remember 2010 us apologizing to the Guatemalan president about our experiments on Guatemalans.
All right.
And so how does this sentence that he thrived on controversy, and he took pride, he overcame local political pressures to crusade for preventive medicine and other measures to safeguard public health. And this guy was giving interviews in the 70s. He was there for almost 20 years.
Right.
Inside of the envelope of the Tuskegee experiment itself.
The Tuskegee experiment starts coming out in 1972. He's there. He's in charge. And I guess what I want people to take away from this is that these agencies like the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, maybe that's not Centers for Disease Control in the way that we've been trained to think it is. Maybe it is there to control disease. Public Health Service.
But it's just like the Patriot Act.
It's kind of like the Nazis, Public Health Service. No, not really Public Health Service in the way that you would think that it is. And we can tell by the way that Time Magazine wrote that article and what really happened in the, what was that? When they're writing about the Tuskegee thing, about how it had started from, they were concerned about African-American health and why so many of them, why this was exploding in this one area. It was exploding in this one area.
Probably
it just happened
because,
to be studying it.
Yeah.
So it's
how convenient.
We're all just a bunch of guinea pigs.
Here is the successor to Mr. Langmuir for the EIS. He called him visionary, clairvoyant, tenacious, well-prepared, scientifically honest, and optimistic.
Is that why you had to look down at all his notes?
And he's so tenacious. He doesn't. When you see these descriptions of Langmuir from the NIH, and you see the video that I just showed you, he's a dweeb.
Right.
And so his concerns. Langmuir enjoyed being a civil servant and working to benefit the public. Right. Well, it depends on how
I guess
like when Clinton said, it depends what you mean by what is.
Well, when he, at the beginning
what is benefit
of this scope, when we're playing the Bill Clinton apology, he looks at the thing and he's like, I
am sorry. It's just
we should go to that
the South Park.
But his concerns were to control and prevent disease by applying the principles of epidemiology to the identification of causes and solutions. He describes Langmuir as someone with a public health message who arrived at the right time and place in history to be able to broadly disseminate his message. Yeah, you know what? I mean, according to these guys, maybe that was the right time.
Right.
Oh, so this interview was 79.
Wow, almost 1980.
Almost 1980.
Okay.
So we get into the Carter years, and this guy, you know, he should have been.
You know, why wouldn't he have asked him about Tuskegee?
No. Can't do that. He said, Justin Andrews took me to the mountain and showed me the promised land. That's how he got to CDC.
Right.
In the 65 years since his arrival at CDC, his disciples,
wow,
EIS and field epidemiology training program officers have played pivotal roles in combating the root causes of major public health problems. Now think about this, people. We're always talking about how, especially in America, we're fatter, we're unhealthier, we're living worse lifestyles. So they played a pivotal role in the health, in public health.
Right.
And combating the root causes of major public health problems.
Maybe they are the root causes of major public health problems. Wow.
Fun times.
Nothing new under the sun, like he just said.
His interviewer nailed it.
Right. So we started out telling you guys about the Tuskegee experiment, which went on from 32 to 72. And it's funny because this was a 40 years that we talked about, this experiment on the African-American race. But as we were doing this, and I have looked at this before, there are a lot of experiments that our government has done on us, and it's not just an African-American thing. It's all of us. There was one that was done in Missouri where planes sprayed
St. Louis.
Particles, they're radioactive particles, and that was in
It was in the 50s, wasn't it?
It was in the 50s, if you Google like experiments done on the American people that they're not aware of, there's tons of them, and I think there were some that even went on into like the year 2000. So it's funny how we all focus on in the mainstream media and everybody will talk about Tuskegee, but there's so many more that they don't talk about.
But the length of Tuskegee gives you a good timeline to show that 32 to 72. There's there's generational change, and it still kept going. And even after it got exposed, it's like a
who knows?
It's like a footnote in history.
They say that it stopped in 72.
Yeah.
It's kind of like
the thing in Guatemala that was 46 to 48, but they still kept doing some numbers and stuff
till
into 53.
1953.
So, and he's there the whole time.
Right.
Langmuir. That's a Langmuir. That's what a Langmuir is.
Right.
We should have come up with something.
We should, yeah.
What is a
Langmuir? Maybe we'll still come up with that.
Maybe he morphs into a Fauci.
Oh my gosh. Huh.
I mean,
Langmuir, the only difference between Langmuir and Fauci is about like a foot in height.
Because they both have the same personalities, and they're both. I bet Langmuir's first pitch of the Nationals game would have gone just as terribly as Fauci's did.
Right. Anyway, thank you guys for listening. Dan is right. Periscope is shadow banning us or something. This is the least amount of viewers we've had in a long time.
Who knows what it'll turn out to be, because the last one is coming up on 1600. So.
But Dan, it's like all our viewers now, it comes after.
Yeah.
Or it's like they don't.
95% comes afterwards.
Yeah, 95% for the last 8 months.
Yeah, it's been a while.
But this is the lowest it's ever been.
Mm-hmm.
So
I don't care. We said what we had to say. And we learned how to kind of navigate through this.
And I know that the way that we did it tonight, I have watched and I've made notes in my head on how we can do it better next time. So this is just a learning process for us. We are not professionals at this. We don't charge money for this. So I appreciate Dan listening, and anybody else later who tunes in and listens to it. You know, there's some good information in here. And if you like it, we hope that you'll share it with your friends, because we just want this information to get out there. That's our motivation.
Just look at who's telling you what and where they come from. And I've had friends on Facebook especially tell me, and with their all haughty attitudes, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And, some of that, there might be truth to that, but first you got to freaking know the history, and you can't assume at any age. I'm realizing at 53 years old that there's a lot of things in history that I thought were wrapped up in a box in my head that said, oh, I already know this.
Right.
We need to stop knowing things and start finding out about things.
Right.
And that this last year for me, from 52 to 53, has been very eye-opening. And more, I just got to go, you know what? I have memories of dates in World War II especially, but a bunch of the other wars too. And I know all kinds, Operation Barbarossa, Operation this, and all these, a lot of things that other history buffs wouldn't know. And we just got to understand, we don't know.
That right?
We have got to get out of that mindset of, oh, there are a couple of these few things I know. And I thought I kind of knew about the Tuskegee experiment.
I didn't know
I don't.
anything.
And we still got more to learn.
Right.
And this is just from the easy periphery, just kind of cream off the top stuff that you'll find on the internet. There's, we've been doing some terrible things here.
Yeah.
And so we've got to get our head. A bunch of people have their head in the sand. That's why we've done a couple of episodes on apocalypse. And apocalypse just doesn't mean that I'm a Christian and I'm saved by Christ and I'm going to heaven and the people that don't believe are not. I believe that a lot of us have some awakening to do, and Christians included. Awakening is for everybody.
Right.
And there's no single person on this planet who's got it all figured out. And, I was arrogant, and I've got to try to fight every day against having that arrogance and thinking that I had some stuff figured out. So.
Yeah. But, on another note, it's kind of exciting because there's like all these mysteries to unveil and all these stories that you've been taught,
It's a new thing to dig into
and debunk and go like, wow, because I think that we've been lied to about everything. Mm-hmm. And this virus, this pandemic, what I call it, is revealing a lot of that. And there's a lot of people now with a lot of time on their hands that are at home researching this stuff, and that might not have been in the plan, when they were planning, 201 event, doing pandemic. I don't think they accounted for
just info being people pushing back and info out there, and
in this age of information, where information is at your fingertips, where we're going to figure this stuff out, and y'all don't have enough time.
You know what? We didn't get to show you some things.
Oh,
I didn't do the banner. Should have put the banner on.
Oh yeah.
There's mine and Yvonne's
Twitter handles.
So we're still figuring this out.
Yeah. StreamYard is pretty cool though. StreamYard.com is awesome.
And I've already had people come at me after I posted this picture and just say, "Oh, but I've got a video of the science and it's looking good." Just use your discernment. Everybody on this planet they have their own discernment. They can decide to use it or not, and they can develop it, because I'm not the best there as at it, for sure. But, everybody is a sovereign human being, a man or a woman, and you can decide whether or not something is truthful or not. So This is the size of a supposed virus, and these are the gaps in one of those wonderful masks.
Right.
And so here's something I saw on Twitter today. Schools are preparing to introduce breathing breaks to allow students to go outside and take off their masks. So a friend of mine on Twitter responded to that, and they had to do this at his work. It's called a breath of fresh air.
And how sad that you can't sit there and work.
So that's not the
breathing fresh air.
The new normal is every once in a while you get to go have some fresh air.
That is if you decide it's your new normal. You know, it doesn't have to be the new normal.
And I showed that. So the next one I want to show you, this is, you know, everybody goes, science. I believe in science. So, well, you don't believe in science. Science is totally separate from belief. But our state of Mississippi here, health department, on their homepage has some ideas for making your own masks out of your t-shirt. It's not specified whether the shirt has to be clean when you do it, or, you know, did I take this off after doing the yard, or
right.
And it's not, you know, is it supposed to be 50-50 polyester cotton? Should it be 100% cotton? You know, it just shows you some angles for your scissors, and then making some I don't know, some nooses.
I don't know what that is.
So I want to show you a couple of things there. I think that's about all we have, but
yeah.
Remember some of those dates and some of the things we threw out, the Public Health Service.
And the Epidemic Intelligence Service, which, I don't know, that just sounds creepy to me.
Well, and they have 2-year stints.
Yeah.
And they call them agents.
Yeah.
Or officers. They call them officers when they come out.
Officers. And then they go to the CDC, WHO, and then they go all over the world so that they can do what's been done in this pandemic.
But big shout out to Owen Benjamin for alerting us to Epidemic Intelligence Service about
I'd never heard of it.
6-8 months ago.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a while back.
Yeah. So we'll be back in September, which, according to the global pandemic planning board, exercise number 2 will have been unleashed by September. Yeah. So you see,
and 5.7 billion of us will already be dead. So
yeah, according to the models, sources close to this story say. So anyway, we'll be back on September 13th. So it'll be on the 13th.
October will be the next one on the 15th.
Okay, so September.
Just remember,
13th.
guys, we do this on the Ides. It's a Roman calendar, and we started it because it used to be, you know, beware the Ides of March, and that was just Shakespeare and his tomfoolery, turning a good thing into bad, because it's just like other things like apocalypse. The word apocalypse is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing.
It's revealing.
A revealing and unveiling. And the Ides were, especially the Ides of March, were a time of renewal, planting, forgiveness of debts and things like that. A lot of people believe that March should be our new year and not January. So that's what we did with the Ides, and it's a Roman calendar, and 4 months of the year, it's on the 15th. It's usually on the 13th of every month. So the next 15th is coming up in October. So September 13th we'll be back. Episode 31, and we can't wait to see you guys again.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks.